I want to continue to look into the Bible as we journey through the challenges of racism and racial injustice, and hopefully you've been following these because there's a kind of a pathway we've been going down, and I'm currently working through Psalm 69. I think this psalm is really profound, and there's some really insightful things that speak into this moment. And so the verses I've got to at the moment in Psalm 69 is verse 8, and I'll read through to verse 12. So verse 8 says, "I have become a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's sons. For zeal for your house has consumed me, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. When I wept and humbled my soul with fasting, it became like reproach. When I made sackcloth my clothing, I became a byword to them. I am the talk of those who sit in the gate, and the drunkards make songs about me." And I want to just look at these verses in light of the oppressed. So that's where this psalm's coming from, the cry of the oppressed, as we've read in the last couple of videos, but also the allies who associate themselves with the oppressed. This verse 9, "For the zeal for your house has consumed me." It's a psalm, it's a verse that's quoted in John chapter 2, the first video that I did, when Jesus is clearing out the temple. And there I was telling you about how Jesus was fighting for those who were being exploited, for those who were being mistreated, for the outsiders, for those who weren't from nearby, from maybe the foreigner you could call them. And when Jesus cleared out the temple and turned everything upside down, the disciples remembered this verse. Some of us have verses that we remember. I'm not sure this is a verse that would stick in your memory, but it stuck in the disciples' memory. And when they saw Jesus turning tables over, being an ally for those who were being mistreated, the disciples looked and remembered this verse, "For the zeal of your house has consumed me." This passion, this zeal, this adamant something's got to be done for the sake of God's house, for his kingdom, for his people, for God's order, for God's way, has consumed me. It got Jesus to a point where it's like enough is enough, and he turned over tables. And as people looked and said, "What is this man doing? What is he turning upside down?" The disciples looked and said, "He's doing this, he's doing for the zeal of your house has consumed me." And it's almost like in this verse it brings together the oppressed and the ally, and they start to identify with each other. These words, "I've become a stranger to my brothers," speaks an awful lot about our racial divide. That people who are brothers and sisters, we are all part of the human race. One set can be a stranger to the other, but it also applies to the ally. When you start to stick up, when you start to put your head above the parapet, when you start to speak out for those where injustice has been born, you can start to make yourself a stranger to those around you. And it's certainly something I've started to experience personally as I've started to speak out, as I've started to challenge. You get, or I get, a small fragment of the grief and oppression that my brothers and sisters of colour have experienced an awful lot of time. And this bit is almost substitutionary. "The reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me." The grief that these people used to get is now falling on me. And I need to be very careful. I don't want it to sound like, "Oh, poor me, I'm getting a bit of grief." You know, this is what is the reality, that we start to step in to other people's pain and stand up for them. And as we identify with them and stand with them, we start to experience a small part of the grief that they have experienced their whole life. It says, when I wept and humbled my soul with fasting, it became my approach. It's like when I did the right thing, when I started to get broken inside and wept, it came to give me more grief. I became a byword to them. I'm the talk of those who sit in the gate, and the drunkards make songs about me. You get ridiculed. Again, this isn't like some pity party, it's just the reality. Today, as I've started to step out in a few different places and speak up against racism, I've been insulted. I've been called names. I've received aggressive pushback because what I've said is challenging. And I've only experienced a small amount of that compared to others. But this thing, I'm the talk of those who sit in the gate. It's like, you kind of know that some people are talking, going, have you seen that? Have you heard that? Oh man, they're making a big deal of it, aren't they? That is where the ally starts to identify themselves with the oppressed. And again, let me be perfectly clear, this isn't a pity party. It's not like, oh, isn't life tough for us white people, when we speak up? But it is an insight. And it gives me a bit more understanding about why, particularly, a phrase that comes to mind is chip on the shoulder. I've heard that used by a couple of black people have said to me, I just don't speak up because I'm going to be labelled as someone with a chip on their shoulder. And as those of us who've had immense privilege start to speak up, we run the risk, and we need to run the risk of being seen as those who have a chip on their shoulder. We need to run the risk of becoming a byword to them. We need to run the risk of being the talk of those who sit in the gate. And drunkards make song about me. I tell you now, there'll be comedians who'll make jokes about those people who are, fighting for Black Lives Matters and things like that. That is the zeal for the house consuming me. And for those of you who are on this journey to say, we must speak up for the oppressed, we must speak up against racism, we must speak up against racial injustice, we must speak up against systemic racism that is in our culture, in our society, in our churches, in our homes, in my thinking. As we speak up, the zeal for God's house consumes us, and we start to go, no, enough is enough. And as we do that, the grief that others have borne for many years, we'll start to get a taste of it, and we'll identify even deeper with them. Be blessed.